Welcome back to the Draft FC podcast, the podcast website and YouTube channel dedicated to all things official Draft FPL. My name is Mitch and I'm back for another game preview going over waiver options, hidden gems and general Premier League chat ahead of Gameweek 7. Apologies again for missing last week. I did post on most of the forums and social medias just to let you all know that there wouldn't be Gameweek 6 preview. I did, with the best intentions, take all of my recording gear with me on holiday, but decided I was having too much fun relaxing, and the idea of getting it all out and carving myself away from the family was probably not the best idea. And I figured you're probably all right for 1 week without me. So sorry again, but we are back, and right on the eve of another international break. So once I record this, unless we decide to do anything a little bit different over the next couple of weeks, there'll be another little gap before Gameweek 8 preview in a couple of weeks' time. So I think this is quite a good time to this international break will be quite a good time to take stock. When we look at some of the draft data in terms of FPL. A lot of the way that the leagues shape up in terms of their rankings and also actual table positions in your leagues, there is quite a lot of correlation from game week 8 onwards. So things start to find their level a little bit. Might be interesting to do some data and see what the correlation is in terms of FPL points ranking for the actual players, the assets, and how that compares to Game Week 38. I wonder if there's a point in the season where you can really sort of tell who to go. Obviously, there's always going to be exceptions, people that have really good end of seasons and people that always have really good beginnings of the seasons, but that might be something to look into over the next week or so. But for this, it will be all the usual stuff. Now, I'm aware I'm recording this really, really late in the game week window. So we've got a Thursday deadline this evening. I'm recording this just a matter of hours before that deadline. So I suspect quite a lot of you will hear this or see that it's come out after that deadline has passed. I've tried to be mindful of that a bit in some of the picks and gone for some, let's say, of the more lower owned variety, so that if you are scrabbling around in free agency for some options, I've got a feeling a lot of these players may still be sat there and may get missed off of a lot of waivers. So it's Thursday the 2nd. I'm recording this at lunchtime, so about 5 hours before the deadline, ahead of the main game week deadline, which will be Friday 6:30, ahead of Friday night football, which will be between Bournemouth and Fulham. As ever, team news, injury developments, press conference info, all up to date as of now. We've still got some European football to be played this evening, and there are also, I'm very aware, there are press conferences going on as we speak. I've already had to tweak one of the slides because there was a bit of Fulham info that I had to update. So no doubt there will be some things that change between now and then, but of course that's always the case. So without further ado, let's get into it. Very, 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 very quickly, our free trial code for a month is still running. Use the code KICKOFF if you're a new member. If you've never used draftfc.co.uk before, then go and sign up. Use that code and you'll get the first month totally free. You can cancel any time, just to dip your toe in and see what we have created in the background for our Draft FC users. All of the stats that you see me reference in these pods, access to lots of other stats that I don't reference in these pods, plus you'll get into our exclusive Discord channel, which has been really busy. I've barely been able to keep up with it while I've been away, so it's nice to see. So lots of helpful draft managers in there when I'm not available. So kick things off with Waiver Watch, and this is looking at the ins and outs ahead of Game Week 6 last week. So the players that were moving in: Gravenberch, O'Reilly, Stash, Igor Jesus, Diakite, Calvert-Lewin, Udogie, Anthony, and Michael Keane. So pretty good moves there. I mean, I often say that, but even when just looking at this particular list, there is more hits than misses there. And I think it is really one of the reasons we collate the data like we do, because that wisdom of the crowd effect, which, is not always going to be perfect, but on the whole does tend to outperform any individual. Players that were making way: Madeke, Dango, Atara, not sure about that one. Jeremy, Jed Spence, Kevin, Dina, Elliott, and Sar. So yeah, pretty good ins and outs there overall. In terms of injuries and suspensions, there's quite a few to list. Gabriel had a bit of an issue last night in the Champions League, but all the news seems to indicate that he'll be okay. I did have Mosquera penciled into the predicted lineup when I heard that news, but I've already taken him back out and put Gabriel in. Mings remains out for Villa. Veltman won't be back until after the international break. I've just put the Chelsea defence in there as a whole. Obviously, Colwell's out long term. Tosin's now injured. Fofana could miss out as he's recovering from a concussion, and Trevor Chalobah is suspended. So if Fofana isn't around at the weekend, it's pretty limited options who they could pair at the back. Dewsbury Hall, possibly the most unlucky 5 yellow suspension you'll ever see, but he will miss Gameweek 7. Some of that very late news, literally just before I hit record from the Fulham press conference. Muniz is confirmed out, and Jimenez, it will be a late call. So I think I've got Jimenez penciled in to start, because I would imagine if they can get him on the pitch, then they will, because there isn't really as a bit of a drop-off after the two of them. Liverpool had a couple of big injuries in their Champions League defeat. Ekitike came off with what looked like a hamstring injury, and Alisson also came off with some sort of muscular injury. It's hard to pinpoint exactly what that was. Slot seemed to suggest he'd definitely be out for Gameweek 7, but we're waiting for proper details on that one. Livramento came off injured for Newcastle last week. He's been one of the most reliable, consistent defenders in the game so far, so that's quite unfortunate for owners, but looks like he could be out until close to December. So if you do own him, he's a definite drop. And then Solanke, who, this isn't new news, but the new news is that he's gone and had some, as it's being quoted, minor surgical procedure to try and sort out this ankle issue. It's a really frustrating. I mean, Solanke has probably been, if I had to distill all of the comments, questions and stuff that I've had since draft day, what to do, whether to drop Solanke, whether to swap him out for someone else, has been up there with one of the most frequent themes of questioning that I've received. And it's been really hard because, we kept being told, he's just a week away, not trying to undervalue how nailed he is and the consistency he put up once he is firing. And then we get this news in the context that Spurs have pretty much hired and fired their entire medical team twice in the last 2 or 3 years, and there's been lots of issues there. He's not the first one. You do wonder whether it's the player's fault or whether it is the medical department's fault, because I guess one thing we do forget is that all these players are human beings. So if they're told, I think you're probably going to need a little operation to sort this out. If a player doesn't want an operation and just wants to see how it goes, there isn't a huge amount the club can do. Depending on, again, we've never really actually heard what the problem is. There's a few things it could be. There's a condition called footballer's ankle. Could be that a ligament injury has just failed to heal properly. Whichever one it turns out to be, I still can't really suss out how it's taken so long to make this call. But there we go. In terms of that theme, that question about whether you drop, I mean, obviously it's like anything in draft, it's incredibly individual. I think if you're in a small league, when I say small leagues, I'm talking kind of 6 teams and fewer, you're probably well within your rights to drop him, to be perfectly honest, because it's probably a decent option on the waiver pile if you need. If you're in bigger leagues, sort of more than 8 teams or 8 or more teams, I still think unless someone's dropped, I don't know, like a Strand Larson or somebody that I would still value pretty well, then again, I think you just kind of have to sit on him at the moment. The fixtures for Gameweek 7, so Friday, kick things off, Bournemouth against Fulham. Saturday lunchtime is Leeds versus Spurs. Quite a good contingent of games the rest of Saturday. Arsenal, West Ham, United, Sunderland. Sunderland, I've got my eye on. I think that could be a really good game. Chelsea, Liverpool, and then a lot of games on Sunday, finishing off with Brentford hosting Manchester City. Talking points since you last saw me, Nuno has become the new West Ham manager. Graham Potter was sacked. Quite strange timing. He was sacked at the weekend, sort of the day before. Was it the day? No, 2 days before the game. Sort of felt that if that decision had been made, it probably could have been made days before that. But there you go. I don't have too strong an opinion on it. It kind of makes sense. Nuno was the obvious choice to just plug and play. Really doesn't fill me with inspiration. But if I take a more zoomed out view of the West Ham squad, there's definitely some Nuno players in there that he can build a team around. So it definitely improves some players' value. One of which we will talk about in the main section in a few minutes' time. Putting their long overdue loss for Liverpool. They've obviously followed that up since I made this slide with a defeat in the Champions League. I think some people have been a bit too existential about Liverpool's form at the moment. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think they've possibly slipped to second favourite in the bookies' odds for the league now. I think Arsenal just crept ahead of them. But the fact that they've been able to pick up the points they have, not playing particularly well, I still think puts them in pretty good stead. I think the key decision this week is what they do with Florian Wirtz, and that seems to be the obvious thing that isn't making sense in terms of the balance. Szoboszlai then getting shifted to right back to try and add that in. I don't think it's quite working. I think if they just play with a right back and can get Gravenberch, McAllister and Szoboszlai in midfield, that probably gives them a little bit more balance. Ekitike's out, so whether or not they don't decide to do that this week, we'll have to see. But it is obviously quite a big fixture away at Chelsea. It'll be a difficult one, so they'll want to do whatever they can that's best for them. It really just depends how Wirtz will take that. Some players might, it's good for them to sit out a week. Others, it can really dent their confidence. So, we'll see. He's still, he's carrying the weight of that massive price tag, which is one of the main downsides we were talking about in the summer. Next point I've put is that probably following on from that Liverpool point, every Premier League team looks beatable. There's absolutely no bankers in this league, and in particular this season, the newly promoted teams look as solid a trio as we've had for a number of years now. And everyone looks like on their day they can grind out a result, which makes it really good for draft because it opens up the possibilities for players that we can consider from the likes of Sunderland, who will feature quite heavily in this episode, as you'll see. Next point, clean sheets remain just as elusive as ever. We were sort of lulled into a bit of a false sense with that. I think, there have been some early successes in our weekly clean sheet hunt, but I expect things overall to settle into the frequency we've become accustomed to over the last couple of years, which means their value is still high if you can land on them week to week. Following on from that, I've put, are assists pointless now? Now, of course, they're not pointless. You get 3 points for them, and usually a very welcome 3 points. But I guess in the grand scheme of things, how much should we be considering players that are good at getting assists when deciding who to bring in out of our team? If we look at the defenders, for example, Diouf for West Ham leads the way with 4 so far, yet there are 25 defenders ahead of him in terms of overall FPL points scored. Clean sheets and DEFCONs are our bread and butter for defenders. So, and then attacking returns, a header from a corner is really just gravy on top. So, yeah. And then for midfielders, you've got Grealish, Doku and Kudus also all on 4 assists. And only Doku manages to scrape into the top 20 midfielders overall. Glance at the top 10 mids so far shows a fairly even split between kind of seasoned goal scorers like Semenyo and Salah, and then those central midfield maestros who now have that new value, who are able to combine a bit of everything. They can get an assist, get a goal, get their defensive contributions up as well. So I think in the top 10, we've got Caicedo, Gravenberch, Garner, Cullen, and Stash for Leeds. So yeah, really is just showing that the meta is leaning that way. Let's get into the main picks then. Now, for the next couple of weeks, I'm going to be referring to stats from 10-team leagues, and I am narrowing it down to the top 200 leagues. So what we do, and what any member at Draft FC can do now, is filter the global ownership tables by sort of caliber of leagues. You can go all the way down to the top 10 leagues if you really want, but it's probably a bit much at the moment. So for now, so the way we do that is we look at, so for every league out there, including yours, if you're listening, we will have on system how many total points as a league you've accumulated so far. Now, it's not a perfect system of ranking leagues. And in fact, you can see where your league ranks in our global rank table by using those numbers. But we feel it gives pretty good sense of how competitive a league is, because if you've got the leagues at the top, in order to accumulate points to be at the top, would have to have every manager engaged in the waivers, picking up those informed players and just grinding out as many points as you can. So you can narrow it down. And at the moment, I'm going to use the stats for the top 200 leagues. I'll probably do that again for Game Week 8. But as I mentioned at the beginning, because the things seem to level out a little bit beyond Game Week 8, for Game Week 9, I might hone in a little bit tighter and look at the top 100 leagues when doing those roster percentage stats. By doing this, essentially, we cut out, or as good as we can, we cut out all of the dead leagues, because there are every season, particularly in 18 leagues, a number of leagues out there that get drafted. And by the time we get to the second international break, as we're about to, nobody's really active, or maybe one or two managers are active and the rest are just drifting. So the ownership stats that we take from those leagues aren't really representative of the value those players have now, if that makes sense. Sorry, that was a bit of a roundabout ramble. So so that will be so you'll notice if you're really good at memorizing some of these stats from previous weeks, that the roster stats will be slightly higher because we're talking about the informed players and we're looking at the good leagues who may have already picked these guys up. So in terms of goalkeepers, which we don't often talk about because of that injury to Alisson, Mamardashvili, who is a mouthful to say and is the Liverpool number 2, is almost set to start this weekend. Now, obviously, it is a tricky one. It's away at Chelsea. It's not going to be a banker for a clean sheet, but if you wanted it, if you were covering off a head-to-head opponent who's got a Liverpool defender, then that could be a way in. He's only picked up in 1 in 4 10-team top 200 leagues at the moment, so plenty of availability probably for most of you listening. In terms of defenders, a couple of themes emerging here. United have got a home game against Sunderland, and despite how much I like Sunderland and how high I am on them, on paper, this is still a decent fixture to target if you think United can keep a clean sheet. Shaw is on there. He's owned in just 10% of leagues, so he's an easy way in. But you're probably only going to get the clean sheet points there if they're on offer. De Ligt, on the other hand, far higher ownership, 70% owned in top 200 leagues, but you do have the added benefit of being far more likely to pick up the bonus 2 defensive contribution points. Another one is Aston Villa. They are at home to Burnley. Despite their not being able to score very well, they still remain fairly solid. So they're probably more of a banker for the clean sheet, less so again, though, for the defensive contributions. Konsa, 60% owned, and Lucas Digne, 45% owned. Diouf, who we just mentioned, is owned in just over half of leagues. If you do fancy the idea that he's just going to keep getting assist after assist, by all means pick him up. It's not a great fixture away at Arsenal at the weekend, so personally not one I'm too interested in. And then the last one on there, the guy you might have seen on the slides if you're watching at the beginning, big score last week, I think he got 17 points, is Alderete for Sunderland, just 26% owned. An away trip to Old Trafford, not a bad shout for defensive contributions, and also it's not impossible that Sunderland keep a clean sheet there. Yeah, I know we don't really talk about it. It's kind of a bit of a taboo topic on here, but I did have Alderete on the bench in my normal FPL team last week, so I feel like I owe him a shout out. In midfield, Stash, I'm quite high on this week. And interesting, I was surprised to see how high his ownership had crept up. And this is obviously, as I said, in those very engaged leagues, nearly 60% owned. A home game against Spurs, I think, is a very good opportunity for defensive contribution points. If we look at the teams that Spurs have faced, and particularly look at the central midfield players who have played against Spurs so far, Game Week 1, Cullen for Burnley got the 12 defensive contributions, so he got the 2 points. In Game Week 3, Tyler Adams did the same. In Game Week 4, Thomas Souček was on 11 he got sent off before the hour mark, so almost certainly would have hit the 12 and got the extra 2. And then in Gameweek 6, Andre for Wolves got 15 and got the extra 2 points as well. I think a lot of this is due to how poor the Tottenham central midfield can pass and retain the ball. It's not their forte. Given the lack of options, they're sort of forced to try and be a little bit more adventurous with their passing, which isn't their comfort zone. And as a result, it means there are plenty of opportunities for the opposition, particularly their opposite numbers in midfield, to intercept and recover the ball. So that's why I like Stash this week. If you're looking for someone to maybe pick up 4 or even a bit more, if he jumps in with some attacking returns, he could be a solid option. Jorginho for Brighton, we're seeing play a bit of number 9, a bit of number 10. I still like him, just over half owned, and they've got a decent trip away to Wolves. Xhaka for Sunderland is becoming one of my favourite players in the game this year. He is rock solid, insane defensive contribution stats on a per 90 basis, but a lot of help comes from the monster tally of 20 that he got in Game Week 6 against Nottingham Forest. Our pre-season outlook on Sunderland, our view that Xhaka could be huge for them and that we thought Sunderland would be well above the other 2 newly promoted teams, is so far looking like quite a good call. Though still obviously very, very early days, so I don't want to throw a jinx over there for Sunderland fans. But yeah, Xhaka is just everything you could want and need for a club coming up to the Premier League. And with every passing week, you wonder how a quote-unquote bigger team, whether that's in the Premier League or in Europe, didn't fancy taking him on. And the thing that we did sort of consider it, but if we think back to the end of his Arsenal days, he was pretty prolific in the attacking returns. And we've seen that. He's got 3 assists in the last 4 games. So he is really fitting that mould as a player that can do a little bit of everything. And his floor is basically 3 to 4 points a week, which is incredible. And if you're in larger leagues, he has to be picked up. He's such an easy banker that you would play. He's fixture proof, because if they've got a hard game, you're still looking at 3 to 4 points. And if they've got an easy game, you're hoping he gets even more than that. So sneak little spoiler, and 20 of my own league rivals who are listening to the pod before the deadline, Xhaka is currently penciled in as my number 1 move this week. And then finally, Jeremy for Palace. I'm not 100% he'll start. I'm pretty certain he will start. Given the position he plays as a fairly advanced attacker, 25% with an away trip to Everton, I think he'll have some love in the waivers this week too. And then that player I was alluding to, whose value could be shooting up a bit under Nuno, is Fulkrug. Now, just referencing my own draft league, which is a 9-team league, Fulkrug was actually dropped a week or 2 ago. He sits in the waiver pile, so he's definitely going to get grabbed by somebody. We saw him start first game. Now, obviously, Nuno would have picked the team, but he wouldn't have really got into them that much. But I think it's an interesting show of intent, and it's probably slightly lazy analysis, but if you look at the Nuno blueprint that we saw on show at Forest with Chris Wood at the top, Fulkrug is as close to a Chris Wood archetype as you can get. There isn't really anyone like him in the West Ham squad, so I think could bode well for Fulkrug, providing he can keep himself fit. In gem time, and we're still looking at just the top 200 leagues, but as usual, we're only considering players here that have less than 10% ownership. So because of the new filter of the top 200 leagues, it does narrow it down a bit. Still loads of defenders, though. If you fancy a Brighton defender, there will be plenty available. Van Hecker and Dunk, very low ownership there. If you want the other side of that Aston Villa-Burnley equation, again, lots of availability for Burnley defenders. And the likes of Ekdal, Esteve, again, very, very solid for defensive contributions. So quite a high floor for them, even if they get beat. The one who I think will definitely shoot out of hidden gem territory this week, because people, I think, will be looking to try and get in on the Bournemouth defence, is Jimenez. Just 3% owned. The rest of them are all well up there in the ownership stats. So yeah, I think he will be a popular pickup if you want a nice early treat for the Friday night game and that Bournemouth defence. Into midfield, and Kamada is one I've got. A Glasner favourite. I think it probably just took a bit of time for him to adjust to the Premier League last year, but he looks to be there now. 2 assists in his last 4. He can line up deeper in the double pivot, or he can be in one of those more advanced 8/10 roles behind the striker. As I said earlier, though, the odd assist here and there doesn't really pay the bills these days. So he could be somebody who's getting plenty of Man of the Match awards in real life, but just lots of 2-pointers for us. But we'll see. I think he's got potential to expand a bit, but I'm not 100% what his best position is at the moment. And with Sarr back from injury, Jeremy likely to get minutes, it then sort of forces him further back if he gets in the team at all. Aqua is there for Forest. I think we're seeing early indications that he's a bit of an Ange favourite, and from what I've seen of him so far, he definitely passes the eye test. So it's not a great fixture away to Newcastle this week. Tyler Adams is always going to be on the fringes of our thoughts for our draft teams this year, I think, particularly for larger than average leagues, just 2% owned, and another one who can just get 4 or 5 points on any given week. And, not the worst fixture at home to Fulham. And so I guess the reason I didn't really spell it out when I was talking about Jimenez a minute ago, the reason why he might be even more high on the Bournemouth defence this week is that Fulham could well be going into that game without an out-and-out number 9 fit. They brought on Adama Traore when Jimenez came off last week. Didn't really look great. So, they could struggle to score. And then finally, Gruder. He's just a good player, and he's a player that has to get minutes for Brighton this season if they're going to realise his value after paying sort of 30 million euros beginning of last season. So I think if you're going to continue to play the likes of Jorginho as a false 9, then it does open the door in that number 10 spot. Now, we've seen a little bit of competition from Diego Gomez, but personally, I'm not letting a very impressive display against Barnsley allow any delusions of grandeur for him. I still think Gruder is ahead of him in the pecking order. No hidden gem forwards really worth talking about this week, so I won't. Next, on to our fantastic fours section. A nice slide after the Europe victory in the Ryder Cup. Looking back, obviously we didn't do Gameweek 6. Gameweek 5 was not great. We had a couple of 4s from the Andersons, but Van den Berg just 1 and Adams just 3 points. It means our season record, my season record, is 5 out of 12 with an average of 3.75. So we need a good week this week, and I think we can have a good week this week. I've gone for a couple of Leeds players, which may not surprise you given what I said a minute ago. Joe Rodon at the back, unlucky not to pick up more defensive contribution points. He's got a couple of 9s in back-to-back games now. Made up for it with a goal, obviously, in Game Week 6, giving him a pretty impressive average overall so far, about 5 FPL points per week. He's nailed to start. Say, good chance of hitting the defensive contributions again. And against a former club where he was deemed surplus to requirements, the expected narrative there is also up. So, I'm sure he'd love to get on the score sheet in that game. But say for this purpose, we're just looking at him. We're just looking for him to get 4 points. Could have also easily put Strauch in here too. Ampadu's the other one. Again, all the same reasoning as with Stash. But Ampadu I've saved for this slide, for this particular segment, because he is more of a beast when it comes to defensive contributions. He's averaging around 11 per 90, which means he's basically been in with a shout of getting the extra 2 points in every game he's played, and he missed a couple with injury. Not much else to shout about here. He's not one that's getting anywhere near goal involvements, but in terms of trying to get a 4-pointer out of him, I think he is as good a bet as we could have this week. And his ownership in top 200 10-team leagues is 0. So I dare say he will be available to the vast majority of you listening if you want a super boring pick. The one that I skipped over there is Mukiele for Sunderland. Again, all the same reasoning as I've already said with that trip away to Old Trafford. And then the last one is Florentino for Burnley, who again is in the same bracket as Ampadu for top 200 leagues. 0% ownership. So pretty much there for all of you. he is an emerging DEFCON beast. If he's not already, he's got 30 in the last 2 games, which, in fact, he's only played 2 full 90s in the last 2 games. So pretty much 100% record so far from the 2 games he's played. I think he's another one that could be a banker this week. And if he got another decent tally, he will be really, really creeping into the conversation. Similar to Ampadu, though, I don't think he's in much danger of popping up with a goal, though. So he is really just a boring 4 or 5 point a week player that we shouldn't understate. And if I haven't said it before, if you've not heard me say it before, the reason that 4 points is quite a good... Well, put it this way, when I'm looking at my team, particularly at the end of a game week, the baseline in my mind is 44 points. So I'm looking week in, week out for my players on average to get 4 points each. And if a player is routinely not doing that or seems to be averaging below that, then I'm looking to chop them. It's as simple as that, really. Now, the 44 point mark and the 4 point per player per week changes depending on your league size. So if you're in a 9 or 10 team league, which I've played in for the majority of my draft career, that is about the pass score. That doesn't mean if you get 44 points every week, you will win the league, because often it's slightly higher than that. But you certainly will be there or thereabouts if that's the baseline that you're aiming for. Now, if you're in a 4-team league, for example, you're probably needing to get close to a 5 point baseline in your players, because you've got far more to choose from. Equally, at the other end of the spectrum, if you're in a 16-team league and you can regularly get 35 points a week, that's probably a competitive score in a head-to-head league too. So that's the reason why I treat 4 points as a bit of a golden line in my head. Another thing we can do now in the Draft FC data is filter by, and it's not a term that we've coined, but useful weeks, which is just how many times is the player getting above and beyond that threshold. Because particularly for head-to-head leagues, you want consistency and you want to be competitive every week in your matchup. So it's no good just having players that are going to smash 20 points in a week and then do nothing for the next month, because you may have won that head-to-head matchup, but you're then potentially losing 3 on the bounce. So you're better off having a player that gets 4 points every week than you are a player who scores, 12 points this week and then gets 2 points for the next 3 or 4 weeks, if that makes any sense. In classic scoring leagues, you can be a little bit more liberal with that thinking, because a player, you're obviously just going for a tally. So a player that gets 20 points randomly can still do a very good job at getting you up the league table. Predicted lineups, I've done the first sweep, but I'll be honest, it's probably not the best first sweep I've done. I need to give it another once over once this is edited. But I don't see a huge amount changing, to be honest, especially as we're entering the international break. But yeah, just keep an eye peeled. As soon as I make a tweak, it refreshes instantly. So if you want to look right before the deadline, that would be as up to date as can be. So that is it for this episode. A final reminder, the kickoff code is still valid if you want to have a look at what we've got on offer at draftfc.co.uk and get yourself into the user area and get yourself into the Discord channel. Only for new members, but yeah, if you want to check us out. If I'm being perfectly honest, if you're thinking about doing it, and I'm not sure how the other lads are going to like my marketing skills here, but this week may not be the best week to use it. I think maybe keep this code running for a little while, but certainly once we get back from the international break, you get a full 4 game week free trial. You sign up for a free month at that point. If you sign up now, then half of it's going to get blown away on the international break. But if you're desperate, it's there. Otherwise, if you are a fan of the channel, if you forgive me for missing last week, give us a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. It really helps the channel to grow. If you're listening on the audio, then give us a follow on whichever podcast platform you listen on. Give us a follow on X at draft_FC. All the details are in the description below. If you can't remember, or if you need to message me through other channels. Yeah, best of luck ahead of Gameweek 7. I will be active in the comments right up until tonight. I'm aware that a lot of those comments will probably drift in after the deadline now. But pretty much if you get them in within the next few hours, I will respond to all of them. So yeah, till next time, stay shook.